I felt the cold fluorescent lights of the hospital room burning into my retinas as I stared at the ceiling, counting each slow tick of the wall clock. The cardiac monitor beside me beeped steadily, a mechanical companion that cared more about my survival than my own flesh and blood. I reached for my phone, wincing as the movement pulled at the fresh surgical incision running down my chest. Typing was an effort, each letter a small mountain to climb, but I managed to send a message to the family group chat. Surgery went well. Doctor says I can go home tomorrow. Can someone pick me up around 11? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I watched the screen, waiting for those 3 bouncing dots that would signal someone was typing a response. The silence stretched longer than it should have. My son Michael knew about my triple bypass surgery for weeks. He'd nodded solemnly when the cardiologist explained the procedure, promised he'd be there. "Don't worry, Dad. We've got you covered." Finally, a reply appeared. "Sorry, can't make it. Big meeting at work tomorrow that I can't reschedule." Michael, my only son, my only child, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the teenager I'd helped through college applications, the man whose down payment on his first house had come from my retirement savings. I typed back slowly, each word a small surrender. "I understand. Work is important." But before I could set the phone down, another message appeared. This one from Vanessa, my daughter-in-law. "Why don't you just call a cab? It's not like it's our fault you needed surgery." The words stung worse than the incision in my chest. I read them again, hoping I'd misunderstood, but there they were, cold and clear on the screen. I didn't respond. What could I say? The heart that surgeons had just repaired felt like it was breaking all over again. But, in a way, no scalpel could fix. Outside my window, rain streaked down the glass, blurring the city lights into watery smears of color. I thought about calling my sister Jean in Arizona, but she was recovering from her own health issues. There was no one else. After my wife Martha died 3 years ago, my world had gradually shrunk to Michael, Vanessa, and a handful of acquaintances who had become increasingly distant. "Mr. Reynolds?" A nurse entered, checking my vitals with practiced efficiency. "How are we doing tonight?" "Fine," I lied, slipping my phone under the thin hospital blanket. "Just fine." She glanced at my chart. "Your recovery is going well. Dr. Patel says you'll be discharged tomorrow morning. Will someone be picking you up?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Yes," I said, the lie coming easily. "My son will be here." After she left, I lay in the darkness, remembering the day Michael was born. I'd held his tiny body, marveling at his perfect fingers, promising to protect him always. Now, 36 years later, I was alone in a hospital room, while my son, where was he really? That big meeting tomorrow. Was it true? Over the years, I'd learned to recognize the slight shift in his voice when he wasn't being entirely honest. My phone buzzed again. Another message in the family chat, this time a photo. Michael and Vanessa at the High Roller Casino, champagne glasses raised in a toast. The timestamp showed it was taken just an hour ago. The caption read, "Feeling lucky tonight." They hadn't even bothered to create a separate chat without me. The realization that they cared so little about my feelings that they didn't even think to hide their evening out. It wasn't just painful. It was clarifying. Like cataracts being removed, I suddenly saw with perfect clarity what I had been slowly going blind to over the years. I thought back to when Martha was still alive. She'd noticed the changes in Michael after he married Vanessa, the gradual distancing, the increasingly rare visits that always seemed to end with requests for financial help. "He's changed," she'd said one night, and not for the better. I'd defended him then, making excuses, blaming work stress, the pressure of a new marriage. But Martha had seen what I refused to. In her final days, she'd held my hand and made me promise something. "Don't let them take advantage of you, James. You deserve better." I'd nodded, but hadn't truly understood what she meant until now, lying in a hospital bed, abandoned by the son I'd sacrificed so much for. I closed my eyes, letting tears slide silently down my temples and into my hair. I thought about all the times I'd come to Michael's rescue. The college tuition, the wedding I couldn't really afford, the down payment that ate into my retirement fund, the co-signed loans. I'd given and given, believing that's what fathers did, never asking for anything in return. And now, when I needed him for the first time, not even for money, just for a ride home after heart surgery, he was at a casino with his wife, annoyed at the inconvenience of my continued existence. The night nurse came in to check on me around midnight, concerned about my elevated heart rate. "Everything okay, Mr. Reynolds?" she asked, adjusting my IV. "Just having trouble sleeping," I said. She patted my hand. "That's normal after surgery. But try to rest. Your body needs it to heal." After she left, I made a decision. I would call a taxi tomorrow, as Vanessa had so callously suggested. I would go back to my small apartment, the one I'd moved to after selling my house to help Michael and Vanessa buy theirs. I would recover alone. And then, when I was stronger, I would make some changes. The thought settled over me like a warm blanket. For the first time since the surgery, I felt something other than pain and betrayal. I felt resolve. Morning came with the hospital's mechanical efficiency. Vitals checked, breakfast served, discharge papers prepared. Dr. Patel came by, reviewing my recovery instructions and medication schedule. "Now, who's taking you home today?" he asked, pen poised over his clipboard. "A taxi," I said, meeting his eyes directly. He frowned slightly. "Is there no family member who can help you settle in?" "The first few days after cardiac surgery can be challenging." "I'll be fine on my own," I assured him, with more confidence than I felt. He hesitated, then nodded. "Well, we'll make sure you have all the support resources you need. There's a cardiac recovery program that includes home visits from a nurse for the first week. I'm going to sign you up for that." I nodded gratefully. As he turned to leave, my phone buzzed. Another message from Michael. "Did you get a ride figured out? We're still recovering from last night." I didn't respond. Instead, I called a taxi company and arranged for a pickup. Then I texted Jean, telling her about my surgery for the first time. She was immediately concerned, offering to fly out despite her own health issues. I assured her I was fine, but promised to keep her updated. The hospital volunteer who wheeled me to the entrance was a man about my age, with kind eyes and a steady grip on the wheelchair handles. "Family running late?" he asked as we waited under the covered drop-off area. "No family coming," I said simply. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Been there myself. Lost my wife to cancer 5 years ago. My daughter lives in Europe now. It's just me and my dog, Bruno." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. He shrugged. "Life takes turns we don't expect. The trick is to keep driving even when the road gets rough." When my taxi arrived, he helped me inside with gentle efficiency. "Take care of yourself," he said, closing the door. The driver, a middle-aged woman with henna-dyed hair, glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Where to?" I gave her my address, then leaned back against the seat, suddenly exhausted. The city slid by outside the window, people rushing to work, stopping for coffee, living their lives, oblivious to my small drama. "Hospital stay?" the driver asked conversationally. "Heart surgery," I replied. She nodded. "My father had that last year. Triple bypass. Scared us all half to death, but he's doing great now. Goes dancing with my mother every Saturday night." The thought made me smile. "That sounds nice." "Yeah, there's something else. Married 52 years and still crazy about each other." She glanced at me again. "Your family meeting you at home?" I hesitated, then decided I was too tired for pretense. "No. It's just me." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's tough. Being alone when you're not feeling well." "It is what it is," I said, looking out the window again. When we arrived at my apartment building, she insisted on helping me inside, carrying my small overnight bag and making sure I got to my door safely. When I tried to tip her, she waved it away. "Just take care of yourself," she said. "And if you need a ride to follow up appointments, ask for Diane when you call the company." Inside my apartment, the silence was oppressive. Everything was exactly as I'd left it 3 days ago when the ambulance had come. A half-empty coffee mug in the sink, the newspaper folded on the kitchen table, Martha's photograph smiling at me from the mantel. I carefully lowered myself onto the couch, mindful of my incision. The discharge instructions said to take it easy, to not lift anything heavier than a gallon of milk for at least 6 weeks. to take my medications precisely as prescribed. I arranged my pill bottles on the coffee table and set alarms on my phone. Then I sat there, alone with the ticking of the clock and the dull ache in my chest, wondering what came next. The apartment felt smaller than before, the walls closer, the ceiling lower. Or maybe it was just that my perspective had changed. Near-death experiences had a way of doing that, I supposed. My phone buzzed. Michael again. "Did you make it home okay?" I stared at the message for a long time before replying simply, "Yes." He didn't ask anything else. No offer to come by, to bring food, to check if I needed anything. Just a perfunctory inquiry that allowed him to tell himself he'd done his duty as a son. I set the phone down and looked around my apartment. This wasn't how I'd imagined my retirement years. After decades of teaching high school history, I'd envisioned traveling with Martha, spoiling grandchildren, perhaps writing that book on Civil War battlefields I'd always talked about. Instead, I was alone in a downsized apartment, my savings diminished, my heart literally broken and repaired. The home health nurse arrived the next morning, a brisk, efficient woman named Gloria, who checked my vitals, examined my incision, and ran through a checklist of questions about pain levels and medication side effects. "You live alone?" she asked, making notes on her tablet. "I do." "Any family nearby who can help out?" "My son lives across town," I said, the words leaving a bitter taste. She looked up. "But not available to help?" I met her gaze. "No, not available." She nodded, no judgment in her expression. "All right then, we'll need to set up a few things to make this easier for you. Grocery delivery, medication delivery. Do you have a neighbor who could check in?" "I don't know my neighbors well," I admitted. After moving from the house where Martha and I had lived for 30 years, I'd kept to myself, too wrapped in grief to make new connections. "Well, I'll be coming by every day this week, and then 3 times next week," Gloria said. "But it would be good to have someone else checking in too. Is there anyone you could call? Friends from work? Church?" I thought about it. There was Bill Masterson, my former colleague from the high school. We'd been close once, meeting for weekly chess games and the occasional fishing trip. But after Martha died, I'd withdrawn from those friendships, too consumed by loss to maintain them. "Maybe," I said, "I'll make some calls." After Gloria left, I did just that. Bill answered on the 3rd ring, his voice instantly familiar despite the months since we'd last spoken. "James Reynolds," he said, surprise and pleasure in his tone. "I was just thinking about you last week. How the hell are you?" "Actually, Bill, I've been better," I said, and then told him about the surgery. His shock was genuine. "Jesus, James. Why didn't you call me? I would have been there." "I didn't call anyone," I admitted. "It all happened pretty fast." That wasn't entirely true. There had been warning signs for months. The increasing shortness of breath, the chest pain I'd attributed to indigestion. But acknowledging the symptoms would have meant dealing with them. And that would have required asking for help. So I'd ignored them until I couldn't anymore, until the pain had dropped me to my knees in the grocery store and a stranger had called 911. "Well, I'm coming over," Bill declared. "What do you need? Food? Books? Company?" "Company would be nice," I said, surprised by the emotion that tightened my throat. Bill arrived an hour later with a grocery bag full of essentials and a stack of mystery novels. "Margaret picked these out," he said, referring to his wife. "She says they're just the thing for recovery, engaging enough to keep your mind off the pain, but not so complicated that you can't follow them on pain meds." We talked for hours, catching up on the months we'd been out of touch. Bill was retired now, too, spending his time volunteering at a literacy program and taking care of his 2 grandchildren 2 days a week. "You should come to the chess club at the community center when you're feeling up to it," he said as he was leaving. "Thursdays at 7. A good bunch of folks." I promised to think about it, and was surprised to realize I meant it. The next few days fell into a pattern. Gloria in the mornings, naps in the afternoon, evenings spent reading or watching old movies. Bill stopped by every other day, sometimes with Margaret, who brought homemade soups and gentle determination. "You're too thin, James," she scolded, watching me eat. "A man your height should have more meat on his bones." Michael called once, a brief conversation that felt like an obligation fulfilled. He didn't offer to visit, and I didn't ask him to. The chasm between us felt too wide now, the betrayal too fresh. Then, a week after I'd come home from the hospital, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Diane, the taxi driver, holding a paper bag. "My mother sent chicken soup," she said, holding it out. "The real stuff, not from a can. She says it heals everything from broken hearts to broken bones." I was too surprised to do anything but accept the bag. "Thank you. That's very kind." She shrugged. "I mentioned you to her. She worries about everyone." She turned to go, then paused. "How are you feeling?" "Better each day," I said. "The incision is healing well." She nodded. "Good. Well, enjoy the soup. Mom's recipe is legendary in our family." After she left, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the container of soup, oddly moved by this unexpected kindness. Between Bill and Margaret, Gloria, and now Diane and her unseen mother, I'd received more care and concern from virtual strangers than from my own son. The realization should have been depressing, but instead, I found it strangely liberating. I'd spent so many years defining myself primarily as Michael's father, measuring my worth by his success and happiness, excusing his increasing neglect as the natural course of things. But maybe there were other ways to matter, other connections to form, other purposes to fulfill. That night, I did something I hadn't done since before the surgery. I took out my journal, a leather-bound book Martha had given me on our last anniversary, and began to write. Not just about the betrayal and hurt, though there was plenty of that, but about the kindness I'd encountered, the possibilities that still lay ahead, the person I might yet become in this unexpected chapter of my life. As I wrote, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but the beginning of a release. Michael and Vanessa had shown me who they were, what I meant to them. It hurt, deeply, but perhaps it was also a gift. The gift of clarity, of truth, of no longer needing to make excuses or nurture false hopes. I was still writing when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Diane again. "Mom wants to know if you liked the soup." I smiled and typed back, "It was delicious. Please thank her for me." The response came quickly. "She says you're welcome anytime for the real thing. We have Sunday dinners at 5. No pressure, just an open invitation." I stared at the message, touched by the generosity of it. These people didn't know me, owed me nothing, and yet they were offering connection, community. "Thank you," I typed back. "I might take you up on that someday." Setting the phone down, I returned to my journal, writing until my eyes grew heavy. The last thing I wrote before sleep claimed me was a quote from Martha, something she'd said in those final precious days. "The heart breaks and lives by breaking." My heart had been broken, physically by disease, emotionally by betrayal. But perhaps, just perhaps, it could still live by breaking, by opening to new possibilities, new connections, new ways of being in the world. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt, for the first time since the surgery, a sense of peace. Tomorrow would bring pain, both physical and emotional. The journey of healing, all kinds of healing, would be long. But tonight, I could rest in the knowledge that I was not as alone as I had thought. And that, for now, was enough. I woke to sunlight filtering through my blinds, casting stripes across the worn carpet of my apartment. For a moment, I forgot everything, the surgery, Michael's betrayal, all of it, and reached instinctively for Martha's side of the bed. The empty space brought reality crashing back, along with the dull ache in my chest that was becoming my constant companion. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 14 days had passed since my surgery. 2 weeks of slow walks around my apartment building, of pills organized in plastic containers, of visits from Gloria, the home health nurse, who had become something of a friend. 2 weeks of silence from Michael, broken only by a perfunctory text every few days asking if I was doing okay. Messages that required minimal effort and allowed him to maintain the fiction of being a concerned son. I carefully swung my legs over the side of the bed, taking a moment to find my balance. Dr. Patel had said the dizziness would fade eventually, But for now, every morning began with this deliberate ritual of reacquainting myself with gravity. Once stable, I shuffled to the kitchen to make tea. Another ritual that connected me to the rhythm of normal life. My phone buzzed on the counter. Bill, checking if I was up for our now regular chess game this afternoon. I texted back a confirmation, grateful for his persistent friendship. These past 2 weeks, Bill and Margaret had been rocks, bringing meals, driving me to follow-up appointments, simply sitting with me when the quiet grew too loud. As I waited for the kettle to boil, I thought about the invitation I'd received yesterday. Diane, the taxi driver who'd taken me home from the hospital, had called to remind me that the offer of Sunday dinner with her family still stood. "My mother's making her famous lasagna this week," she'd said. "It would make her year if you came." I hadn't given her an answer yet. The thought of meeting new people, of sharing a meal with strangers, filled me with both anticipation and dread. I'd grown too comfortable in my isolation, too accustomed to the safety of my four walls. The kettle whistled, pulling me from my thoughts. As I poured the hot water over a tea bag, my gaze fell on the envelope sitting on the kitchen table. It had arrived yesterday, a thick, official-looking thing from my bank. I hadn't opened it yet, partly from the lingering fatigue that made even small tasks seem monumental, partly from a vague sense of apprehension. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tea in hand, I finally sat down and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter from the bank manager and several account statements. I scanned the letter quickly, then more carefully, my hands beginning to shake. There had been unusual activity on my accounts. Large withdrawals, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. According to the bank's records, I'd withdrawn nearly $30,000 over the past month, money I had most certainly not touched. I stared at the statement, hot tea forgotten. There it was in black and white. A $5,000 withdrawal the day before my surgery, another $8,000 the day after, and multiple smaller withdrawals since. All from ATMs I had never visited. All while I was either being prepped for surgery or recovering in a hospital bed. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't given my bank card to anyone. But then I remembered, my wallet had been among my personal effects at the hospital. Michael had come to visit briefly the day after my surgery, had offered to take my wallet and phone for safekeeping while I was moved from intensive care to a regular room. I'd thought nothing of it at the time, had even been grateful for his thoughtfulness. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My own son had stolen from me while I lay recovering from heart surgery. Had the casino trip been funded with my money? How many other times had he helped himself to my accounts without my knowledge? I felt sick, my surgical incision throbbing in time with my racing pulse. I took deep breaths, trying to calm myself as Dr. Patel had instructed. When the worst of the dizziness passed, I picked up my phone and called the bank. The fraud department was sympathetic but cautious. They would investigate, freeze my accounts, issue new cards. But since the person using my card likely had my PIN, a number I had foolishly shared with Michael years ago for emergencies, it would be complicated. They advised me to file a police report. A police report against my own son. The thought was almost unimaginable. Yet as I sat there, staring at the evidence of his betrayal, I knew it was necessary. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about recognizing the truth that had been in front of me for years, that the son I had raised, the man I had sacrificed for, had become someone I no longer recognized. With trembling fingers, I dialed the non-emergency police line. The officer who took my report was professionally detached, taking down the details without comment. Yes, I knew who had likely taken the money. Yes, it was my son. Yes, I wanted to press charges. After hanging up, I sat in the stillness of my apartment, feeling oddly calm. There was clarity in crisis, a stripping away of illusions that, while painful, was also strangely liberating. For years I had made excuses for Michael's behavior, had blamed myself for his shortcomings, had convinced myself that his increasing distance was normal, natural, to be expected. But now I saw the truth. The gradual erosion of our relationship hadn't been about growing up or growing apart. It had been about utility, what I could provide, what I was worth to him in material terms. And now that I had given nearly everything, now that I was aging and ill and in need rather than giving, I had become an inconvenience. A burden to be tolerated at best, exploited at worst. My phone rang, startling me. It was Gloria, calling to say she was running late for our scheduled checkup. I told her not to worry, that I would be here. Where else would I go after all? But as I said the words, something shifted inside me. Where else would I go? Anywhere. Everywhere. The world was still there, still turning, still full of possibilities. I had been living as if my life were over, as if the loss of Martha and the disappointment of Michael had closed all doors. But that wasn't true. It had never been true. By the time Gloria arrived, I had made a decision. I would go to Diane's family dinner on Sunday. I would begin to rebuild a life that didn't revolve around my role as Michael's father. I would seek justice for the theft, not out of vengeance, but because holding him accountable was the only gift I had left to give him, the gift of consequences, of the chance to face his actions and perhaps someday become a better man than he was now. Gloria noticed the change in me immediately. "You look different today," she said as she checked my blood pressure. "More present." I told her about the bank statement, the police report, my decision to attend the dinner. She listened without judgment, her capable hands continuing their work even as her eyes reflected compassion. "It's a hard thing," she said when I finished, "seeing people as they are, not as we wish them to be." "Yes," I agreed. "But necessary." "Necessary," she echoed, packing up her equipment. "And brave." After she left, I made another call, this one to Jean in Arizona. We'd been talking more frequently since my surgery, rebuilding the connection that had faded after Martha's death. She listened to my story with growing outrage. "James, that's theft. That's elder abuse," she said firmly. "You did the right thing filing a report." "It doesn't feel right," I admitted. "It feels awful." "Of course it does. He's your son. You love him." She paused. "But loving someone doesn't mean letting them harm you or themselves. Sometimes love has to be tough." I knew she was speaking from experience. Jean's daughter had struggled with addiction for years, and it was only when Jean had finally stepped back, had allowed her to face the natural consequences of her actions, that real change had begun. Now her daughter was 5 years sober, rebuilding her life one day at a time. "I'm flying out next month," Jean announced before we hung up. "No arguments. I've already booked the ticket." The thought of seeing my sister, of having family who truly cared about my well-being, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "I'll look forward to it," I said, my voice rough with emotion. The next day brought a development I hadn't anticipated. The local police detective assigned to my case called to say they had security camera footage from one of the ATMs where withdrawals had been made. The image was clear, not Michael but Vanessa, using my card the day after my surgery. "We'd like you to come down to the station to make a formal identification," the detective said. "If you're well enough. Otherwise, I can come to you." I told him I would come in. I needed to see for myself, to confront this final piece of evidence with my own eyes. Bill drove me to the police station, his presence a steady comfort. The detective, a man named Ramirez with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, showed me the footage on a computer screen. There was no mistaking Vanessa, her face partially obscured by large sunglasses, but still recognizable as she inserted my card and typed in my PIN. "That's her," I confirmed, a strange calm settling over me. "My daughter-in-law." Detective Ramirez nodded, making a note. "We'll be bringing her in for questioning. Your son as well. You should prepare yourself. Family fraud cases often get messy. Are you sure you want to proceed?" I thought about it, really thought about it. Was I ready for the fallout this would bring? For the potential estrangement that might never be repaired? For the possibility of my son and his wife facing criminal charges? "Yes," I said finally, "I'm sure." On the drive home, Bill was uncharacteristically quiet. Finally, as we neared my apartment, he spoke. "You know, James, I always liked Michael. Thought he was a good kid." "He was," I said, watching the city pass by outside the window. "Once, people change," Bill said thoughtfully. "Not always for the better, but they can change again, given the right motivation." I nodded, hoping he was right, hoping that somewhere beneath the man Michael had become was still the boy I had raised, the child who had once shown such empathy, such kindness, such potential. That night, I got another call from Detective Ramirez. They had brought Vanessa in for questioning, and faced with the video evidence, she had confessed. She had implicated Michael as well, claiming it had been his idea, that he had told her I owed them for all they'd done for me over the years. "We'll be arresting both of them tomorrow," Ramirez said. "I wanted to give you a heads up. These situations can get volatile. Is there somewhere else you could stay for a few days, just to be safe?" I assured him I would be fine, that I had friends nearby, but after hanging up, I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, feeling a profound sadness wash over me. This wasn't how I had imagined my relationship with my son would end, with police and theft and betrayal. Yet here we were, the culmination of 1,000 small choices, 1,000 moments when I had looked away rather than confront the truth. Sunday arrived, and with it, my planned dinner at Diane's family home. I had almost canceled after learning about the impending arrests, but something stopped me. Life had to go on. New connections had to be forged. I couldn't put everything on hold because of Michael's actions. Diane picked me up at 4:30, her small car filled with the scent of her floral perfume. "Fair warning," she said as we drove. "My mother is going to try to feed you until you burst. It's her love language." I smiled, feeling oddly nervous. "I'll pace myself." Her parents' home was a modest bungalow on a tree-lined street, the kind of neighborhood where children still played outside and neighbors knew each other's names. Inside, I was introduced to Diane's mother, Elena, a round-faced woman with Diane's smile and an apron dusted with flour, her father, Roberto, quiet but welcoming, and her brother Marco with his wife and 2 small children. "James!" Elena exclaimed, taking my hands in hers. "Diane has told us all about you. Come, sit. You look too thin. We'll fix that." The evening unfolded with a warmth I hadn't experienced in years. The food was abundant and delicious, the conversation flowing easily around me. I found myself laughing at Roberto's dry humor, answering the children's curious questions about what it was like to be a teacher in the olden days, sharing stories from my own childhood that I hadn't thought about in decades. For those few hours, I wasn't the abandoned father, the heart patient, the victim of theft. I was simply James, a guest at a family table, welcomed for no reason other than human kindness. When Diane drove me home, I felt something I hadn't felt since before Martha's illness. A sense of possibility, of doors opening rather than closing. "Thank you," I said as she pulled up to my building. "For everything." She smiled. "Mom's already planning next Sunday's menu. She says you need more protein." I laughed, surprised by how good it felt. Tell her I'll be there. The next morning brought the reality I had been dreading. Detective Ramirez called to inform me that Michael and Vanessa had been arrested, charged with theft and elder abuse. They had been released on bail, with orders to have no contact with me. "Your son asked me to give you a message," Ramirez said, his voice carefully neutral. "He said to tell you he's sorry, and that he'll pay back every cent." The words should have brought some comfort, but they felt hollow, too little too late. Sorry for getting caught, perhaps. Sorry for the consequences, but not for the betrayal itself. Later that day, as I was returning from a short walk, each day a little longer than the last, as my strength slowly returned, I found Margaret waiting at my door, her face tight with concern. "James," she said when she saw me, "I've been trying to call you. Michael came by our house looking for you." He seemed agitated. A cold fear gripped me. "What did he say?" "He wanted to know if we knew where you were. Said he needed to talk to you, to explain." She hesitated. "Bill told him to leave, that you'd talk to him when you were ready. He didn't take it well." I thanked her for the warning and went inside, locking the door behind me. For the first time since this all began, I felt genuinely afraid. Not of physical harm. Michael had never been violent, but of the emotional storm that was surely coming, of the accusations and recriminations, of the pain I knew would be inflicted and received. My phone rang almost immediately. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. "Dad? It's me. Please pick up. This is all a misunderstanding. Vanessa made a mistake, that's all. We were going to pay it back. Please, just talk to me." Another call, another voicemail. "Dad, they're saying we could go to jail." "Over a family misunderstanding. Is that what you want? Your own son in jail? Please, call me back." The calls continued, the tone shifting from pleading to angry to threatening and back again. I turned off my phone, my heart racing dangerously. Dr. Patel had warned about stress, about keeping my blood pressure stable during recovery. This wasn't helping. A knock at my door startled me. I approached cautiously, looking through the peephole. Bill stood there, his expression grim. "James, it's me. Let me in." I opened the door, relief washing over me. "Bill, what?" "Michael's downstairs. Building manager won't let him up, but he's making a scene. I thought you should know." I sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "What does he want from me?" "To make this go away," Bill said bluntly. "To avoid consequences. To return to the status quo where he takes and you give." I nodded, knowing he was right. What should I do? Bill sat across from me, his face serious. "What do you want to do?" I considered the question carefully. What did I want? Justice, yes. Accountability, certainly. But also, I want him to change, I said finally, to become the man I know he could be, the man I raised him to be. "Then perhaps the best thing you can do is exactly what you're doing," Bill said quietly. "Let him face this. Let him feel the weight of his actions. It may be the only way he ever changes." We sat in silence for a while, the distant sound of a raised voice floating up from the street below. Finally, Bill stood. "I'll go down and tell him you're not available, that any communication should go through the police or a lawyer." After he left, I moved to the window, careful to stand to the side where I couldn't be seen from below. I caught a glimpse of Michael, my son, my only child, being escorted to his car by Bill and the building manager. Even from this distance, I could see the anger in his posture, the defiance in the set of his shoulders. But I also saw something else, something that gave me a small, painful hope. As he reached his car, Michael's shoulders slumped, his head bowed, and for a moment, just a moment, he looked like a lost child, confused and frightened by a world that had suddenly stopped conforming to his expectations. Perhaps that was the beginning. Perhaps that moment of vulnerability, of recognition that actions have consequences beyond his control, was the first crack in the armor of entitlement he had built around himself. I stepped back from the window, my decision made. I would not speak to Michael now. Not while emotions ran so high, not while he was still searching for a way out rather than a way through. But I would leave the door open for the future, for the possibility of reconciliation if, when he was truly ready to make amends. For now, I had my own healing to focus on, physical, emotional, spiritual. I had new friendships to nurture, new purposes to discover, a new life to build from the fragments of the old. As the sound of Michael's car faded away, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and hope. The road ahead would not be easy for either of us. But it was a road, not a dead end. And sometimes, the hardest paths led to the most necessary destinations. I picked up my journal and began to write, not about loss this time, but about possibility, about second chances and new beginnings, about the heart's remarkable capacity to break and heal and break again, growing stronger at the mended places. Outside, the day was fading, the soft light of evening casting long shadows across my small living room. But inside, something was brightening, coming slowly into focus. The outline of a future I hadn't imagined, but might, with time and courage, come to embrace. The autumn light filtered through my apartment windows, casting golden patterns on the wall as I sipped my morning tea. 6 weeks had passed since my heart surgery, 6 weeks of healing, both physical and emotional. My incision had closed to a thin red line, and the constant ache in my chest had faded to an occasional twinge. The betrayal, however, still throbbed like a phantom limb. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Today marked a milestone. My first post-surgery checkup with Dr. Patel. I'd been looking forward to it with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Would he declare me fully healed? Would there be complications? The uncertainty kept me awake most nights, staring at the ceiling and counting heartbeats. A knock at my door announced Bill's arrival. He'd been driving me to all my appointments, refusing any attempts to pay him for gas or time. "That's what friends do," he'd say, waving away my protests. "Ready for the big day?" he asked as I opened the door, his familiar smile a comfort I'd come to rely on. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, grabbing my jacket. The drive to the hospital was quiet, the radio playing softly in the background. I watched the city pass by, marveling at how different it looked now compared to 6 weeks ago. The same streets, the same buildings, but everything transformed by my new perspective. "Heard anything from Michael?" Bill asked, breaking the silence. I shook my head. After that day at my apartment building, Michael had stopped trying to contact me directly. Instead, his lawyer had reached out to the district attorney, proposing a plea deal, full restitution of the stolen funds in exchange for reduced charges. "The DA called yesterday," I said. "They're considering the offer, but wanted to know my thoughts." Bill glanced at me. "And? What are your thoughts?" I sighed, the question weighing heavily. I told them I wanted 3 things: full restitution, mandatory counseling, and community service. No jail time, but real consequences. Bill nodded approvingly. "Sounds reasonable." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At the hospital, Dr. Patel greeted me warmly, his clipboard tucked under one arm. "Mr. Reynolds, you're looking much better than the last time I saw you." The examination was thorough but reassuring. My heart was healing well, my blood pressure almost back to normal, my lungs clear. Dr. Patel seemed pleased with my progress. "You can start increasing your activity level," he said, making notes in my chart. "Short walks becoming longer ones, light household chores, but still no heavy lifting, and continue to monitor your heart rate." "What about stress?" I asked, thinking of the ongoing legal situation with Michael. Dr. Patel's expression grew serious. "Stress is still a concern. Your heart has been through a trauma, and emotional stress can be as damaging as physical exertion. Are you experiencing significant stress?" I hesitated, then told him about Michael and Vanessa, the theft, the charges, the pending plea deal. It felt good to say it out loud to someone who wasn't directly involved, someone who would view it through a medical rather than emotional lens. "I see," he said when I finished. "That's certainly a significant stressor. Have you considered speaking with a therapist? We have an excellent cardiac psychology program here." The suggestion took me by surprise. I'd never been one for therapy, had always prided myself on handling my problems independently. But the events of the past 6 weeks had shaken that confidence. "I'll think about it," I said, not committing but not dismissing the idea either. Dr. Patel seemed satisfied with that. "Good. Now I'd like to see you again in a month, sooner if you experience any concerning symptoms. And James? I'm proud of how you're handling your recovery, both the physical and the emotional aspects." As Bill drove me home, I turned the doctor's words over in my mind. Proud of how I was handling things. Was I handling things well? Sometimes it felt like I was merely reacting, stumbling from one crisis to the next without any real plan. "Bill," I said suddenly, "do you think I'm doing the right thing? With Michael, I mean." Bill was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think you're doing the hardest thing," he said finally, "which is often the right thing." At home, I found a package waiting at my door, a care box from Jean, filled with her homemade preserves, a few new books, and a hand-knitted scarf in preparation for the coming winter. The note inside read, "10 more days until I arrive. Clear your calendar, brother. We have catching up to do." The thought of Jean's visit lifted my spirits. We'd been talking almost daily now, rebuilding our relationship over long phone calls filled with memories, laughter, and occasional tears. She'd become my confidant, the person I called when the weight of everything became too much to bear alone. That evening, Diane picked me up for the now regular Sunday dinner at her parents' home. These weekly gatherings had become a highlight, a tradition I looked forward to with genuine pleasure. Elena always fussed over me, insisting I was still too thin, piling my plate with second helpings. Roberto had discovered my love of chess, and now had a board ready whenever I arrived. The children, Marco's twins, Sophia and Diego, had adopted me as a surrogate grandfather, bringing me drawings and asking for stories about the olden days. Today, Elena met me at the door with a warm hug. "James, we have a surprise for you." In the living room, Roberto sat at his usual place, but beside him was a man I didn't recognize. Tall, silver-haired, with a military bearing softened by kind eyes. "James, this is my brother Carlos," Roberto said, standing. "He was a cardiac surgeon before he retired. When we told him about your surgery, he insisted on meeting you." Carlos extended his hand. "Roberto says you've become part of the family," he said, his accent slightly more pronounced than his brother's. "And I always check on family." The evening took on a special warmth with Carlos's presence. He asked about my surgery, my recovery, offering insights that even Dr. Patel hadn't shared. But more than that, he shared stories of his own career, of the patients who had touched his life, of the profound privilege of helping hearts heal. "The heart," he said as we enjoyed Elena's flan for dessert, "is more than a muscle. It is the seat of courage, of love, of resilience. When we repair a heart, we do more than fix a pump. We restore possibility." His words resonated deeply. Wasn't that what I was trying to do now? Restore possibility? For myself, certainly. But also, in a way, for Michael. By holding him accountable, I was offering him the possibility of becoming a better man, of finding his way back to the values he had once embraced. On the drive home, Diane was unusually quiet, her usual cheerful banter absent. Finally, as we neared my building, she spoke. "Uncle Carlos lost his son," she said, her eyes fixed on the road. 20 years ago, drug overdose. They'd been estranged for years before it happened. I waited, sensing there was more to the story. "He never talks about it," she continued. "But I heard him telling you about the heart being the seat of courage. That's what he told my parents after the funeral, that the most courageous thing he ever did was forgive his son, even though it was too late for them to reconcile." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. Was she suggesting I should forgive Michael? That I should reconcile before it was too late? "I'm not saying your situation is the same," Diane added quickly, as if reading my thoughts. I've never heard Uncle Carlos talk about hearts that way to anyone else. I think he recognized something in you." After she dropped me off, I sat in my darkened apartment, turning our conversation over in my mind. Forgiveness. It seemed an impossible task, a mountain too steep to climb. Yet hadn't I already taken the first steps? By advocating for counseling rather than jail time, wasn't I already choosing restoration over punishment? The next morning brought news from Detective Ramirez. The DA had accepted the plea deal with my requested modifications. Michael and Vanessa would return the stolen money, attend mandatory counseling, and perform 200 hours of community service each. If they fulfilled these requirements and stayed out of trouble for 2 years, the charges would be reduced from felonies to misdemeanors. "Your son's lawyer wants to know if you'd be willing to meet with him," Ramirez added. "Not now, but after the plea is formally entered, to discuss restitution arrangements." I hesitated, my heart racing slightly at the thought of facing Michael. "Tell him I'll think about it," I said finally. Later that day, I had my first session with Dr. Liu, the cardiac psychologist Dr. Patel had recommended. She was younger than I expected, with a direct manner that cut through my initial reluctance. "So," she said after I'd given her a summary of recent events, "you're dealing with heart surgery, betrayal by your son, a theft investigation, and building a new social network, all while grieving your wife. That's quite a lot for anyone to handle." Put that way, it did sound overwhelming. I nodded, suddenly exhausted, just thinking about it all. "Let's start with how you're feeling about your son," she suggested. "Not what you think about the situation, but how you feel." I started to give her the rational analysis I'd rehearsed, the disappointment, the sense of betrayal, the resolve to hold him accountable, but she stopped me. "Those are thoughts, not feelings," she said gently. "Feelings are simpler: sad, angry, afraid, hurt." I tried again, forcing myself to find the raw emotions beneath the logical narrative I'd constructed. "Hurt," I said finally. "I feel hurt. And abandoned, like I don't matter to him anymore." "Those are feelings," Dr. Liu affirmed. "And they're valid ones, given what's happened. Now, what about your feelings toward yourself in all this?" The question caught me off guard. Toward myself? Yes. Are you blaming yourself? Feeling guilty? Wondering what you did wrong as a parent? The accuracy of her question struck a nerve. Of course I'd been wondering exactly that. Where had I gone wrong? What had I done or failed to do that had led Michael to become the person he now was? I must have failed him somehow, I admitted, my voice rough with emotion. To raise a son who could do this. Dr. Liu leaned forward slightly. Let me ask you something, James. If a friend came to you and told you this exact story, that their adult child had stolen from them while they were in surgery, would you immediately assume they must have been a terrible parent? No, of course not, I said without hesitation. Then why are you so quick to assume it about yourself? The question lingered with me long after the session ended, following me through the rest of my day, through my evening routine, into my dreams. Why indeed was I so ready to take responsibility for Michael's actions, to assume that his moral failings must somehow be my fault? The next morning I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. Michael was not a child. He was a grown man who had made his own choices. I had made mistakes as a father, certainly. What parent hasn't? But I had loved him, had taught him right from wrong, had modeled honesty and hard work and compassion. The path he'd chosen was his own. This realization didn't erase the pain, but it shifted something fundamental in how I carried it. The weight was still there, but it no longer bent my shoulders, no longer defined me. With this new perspective, I called Detective Ramirez and told him I would meet with Michael after the plea was entered, not at my apartment, but on neutral ground, with the detective present. Are you sure? Ramirez asked. You don't have to do this. I'm sure, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. It's time. The meeting was set for the following week at the police station. In the days leading up to it, I found myself oddly calm. I wrote in my journal each night, sorting through my thoughts, clarifying what I wanted to say, what I needed to hear. The day before the meeting, Jean arrived from Arizona, her familiar presence a balm to my nerves. She'd aged since I'd last seen her, her hair more silver than brown now, new lines around her eyes. But her embrace was the same, fierce, protective, uncompromising. Let me look at you, she said, holding me at arm's length. You're too thin. Doesn't anyone feed you? I laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. Actually, yes. Elena has made it her personal mission to fatten me up. Jean looked pleased. Good. I want to meet this Elena. And Bill, and Margaret, and Diane. All these people who've been taking care of my little brother. You will, I promised. But first, tell me about you. How's Melissa doing? I asked, referring to her daughter. Jean's face softened. 5 years, 3 months sober. She's back in school, studying to be a substance abuse counselor. Wants to help others find their way out of the darkness. I heard the pride in her voice, the deep joy of a parent seeing their child overcome tremendous obstacles. I wondered if I would ever feel that way about Michael again. Jean, I said hesitantly, do you think people can really change? Fundamentally change? She considered the question seriously. I do, she said finally, but only if they want to. Only if they're willing to do the hard, painful work of facing themselves honestly. And even then, it takes time. Years sometimes. And forgiveness? Is that possible? Jean's eyes met mine, understanding in their depths. Forgiveness isn't a one-time event, James. It's a process. A choice you make again and again. Some days it feels impossible. Other days, it's as natural as breathing. I nodded, absorbing her words. Tomorrow when I see Michael. I don't know if I can forgive him yet, but I think I'm ready to listen. That's a good start, Jean said, squeezing my hand. A very good start. The next day dawned clear and cold, the first real hint of winter in the air. Jean insisted on coming with me to the police station, though she agreed to wait in the reception area during the actual meeting. Detective Ramirez met us at the entrance, his expression professional but kind. They're already here, he said. Interview room 3. Remember, if at any point you want to end the meeting, just say the word. I nodded, suddenly nervous despite my preparation. Jean gave my arm a reassuring squeeze before releasing me to follow Ramirez down the sterile hallway. The interview room was small and bare. A table, 4 chairs, fluorescent lighting that cast a harsh glow over everything. Michael sat with his back to the door, his posture tense. Beside him was a woman I didn't recognize, presumably his lawyer. They both stood as I entered. Michael turned, and I was struck by how much he had changed in just 6 weeks. He'd lost weight, his face gaunt, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't been sleeping. "Dad?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded but didn't trust myself to speak yet. We all sat, an awkward silence filling the room until the lawyer cleared her throat. "Mr. Reynolds, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I'm Sarah Chen, your son's attorney. As you know, Michael and his wife have accepted the plea agreement. Full restitution will be made within 30 days, and they've already enrolled in the required counseling program." I listened as she outlined the terms, her voice crisp and professional. When she finished, she turned to Michael. "Would you like to say something?" Michael looked up, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. "Dad, he began, then faltered. He took a deep breath and started again. "I'm sorry. What we did, it was wrong. Inexcusable." I waited, saying nothing. "I've been trying to understand why I did it," he continued, his voice stronger now. "The counselor says it's about entitlement, about seeing you as an extension of myself rather than as a person with your own needs and rights." That sounds accurate. It was more insight than I'd expected, more self-awareness. I nodded slowly, acknowledging his words. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Michael said. "I wouldn't, in your place. But I want you to know I'm going to make this right. Not just the money, though of course we'll pay back every cent, but the trust. I know that will take much longer. Maybe it will never fully return, but I'm going to try." His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment I saw the little boy he had once been. The child who had come to me in tears after breaking a neighbor's window with a baseball, determined to make amends no matter how much of his allowance it cost. "Michael," I said, my own voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me, "what happened to you? When did money become more important than integrity, than family?" He flinched at the directness of my question, but didn't look away. "I don't know exactly," he said after a moment. "It was gradual. After college, when everyone else seemed to be doing better than me, I started cutting corners. Little things at first. Then, bigger ones. Vanessa was the same way. We enabled each other's worst instincts." "And now?" I asked. "Where is Vanessa in all this?" Michael's expression tightened. "We're separating. The counselor thinks we're toxic for each other, at least right now. She's moved back to her parents' place in Oregon." The news surprised me. I'd always seen Vanessa as the more problematic influence, but had never expected Michael to recognize it himself. "I'm staying with a friend," Michael continued. "Looking for a job. A real one, not another get-rich-quick scheme. The community service hours will make that harder, but I need to do this right." For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Not that things would return to how they'd been before, that was impossible, but that perhaps, with time and effort, something new could grow from the ashes of our former relationship. Something more honest, more balanced, more healthy. "It's going to take time," I said finally, "for me to trust you again, to even know if I can." "I understand," he said, and I believed that he did. "But," I continued, "I'm willing to see where this goes. Slowly. One step at a time." The relief on his face was palpable, his shoulders sagging as if a great weight had been lifted. "Thank you," he whispered. That's more than I deserve." "It's not about what you deserve," I said, the words coming from some deeper wisdom I hadn't known I possessed. "It's about who I choose to be. And I choose to leave the door open even if just a crack." As we prepared to leave, Michael hesitated, then pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This is the first installment," he said, holding it out. "It's not much, just what I could pull together this week. But there will be more. Every week, until it's all paid back." I took the envelope, not for the money itself, but for what it represented. A tangible sign of commitment, of effort, of change beginning. Outside, Jean was waiting, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "How did it go?" she asked, as we walked to Bill's car. I considered the question, searching for the right words to describe the complex emotions of the past hour. "It was a beginning," I said finally. "Just a beginning." She nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "Beginnings are important," she said. "They set the direction for everything that follows." As Bill drove us home, I watched the city pass by, thinking about beginnings and directions, about hearts breaking and healing, about the long, winding path that had led me here. To this day, this moment, this breath. I wasn't naive enough to believe that one conversation had solved everything, that Michael's transformation was guaranteed, that the path forward would be smooth. There would be setbacks, disappointments, moments of doubt on both sides. But for the first time since waking in that hospital room, alone with my pain and betrayal, I felt truly hopeful, not just for myself and the new life I was building, but for Michael too, for the possibility that from this crisis, this breaking point, he might find his way back to the man he was meant to be. And as for me, I was already becoming someone new, someone stronger, wiser, more compassionate than the man I had been before. My heart, broken by surgery and betrayal, was healing in ways I hadn't imagined possible. Carlos had been right. The heart is more than a muscle. It is the seat of courage, of love, of resilience. And mine, against all odds, was beating stronger than ever. The seasons changed, painting my world with the vibrant colors of autumn before softening into the gentle hush of winter. 3 months had passed since my heart surgery, and with each day, I found my strength returning, not just physically, but emotionally as well. The incision on my chest had faded to a thin silver line, a permanent reminder of both vulnerability and resilience. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Jean had extended her visit from 1 week to 3, her presence filling my small apartment with laughter and memories. We'd fallen into an easy rhythm, making up for the years we'd lost to distance and busy lives. Each morning, we shared coffee and conversation at my kitchen table, watching the winter sun slowly brighten the city skyline. "I've been thinking," Jean said one morning, stirring honey into her tea. "What if I didn't go back?" I looked up, surprised. "To Arizona?" She nodded. "My lease is up in 2 months. Melissa is doing well, building her own life. And I miss having family nearby." She gestured around my apartment. "Not that you don't have a lovely shoebox here, but what if we found a place together? Something with a little more room, maybe a small garden." The suggestion caught me off guard. After Martha died, I'd grown accustomed to solitude, had almost convinced myself I preferred it. But these past weeks with Jean had reminded me of the simple joy of shared meals, of having someone to tell about my day, of not facing every decision alone. "You're serious?" I asked. "Completely," she said. "Life's too short to spend it apart from the people who matter. We're not getting any younger, James. And after everything that's happened, well, I think we could both use the support." I considered her proposal, trying to imagine what such a change might mean. A new home, a new arrangement, a new chapter. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. "I'll think about it," I promised. Jean smiled, satisfied for now. That's all I ask. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Later that day, Bill picked us up for my regular chess match at the community center. These weekly games had become an important part of my recovery, providing mental stimulation and social connection that I hadn't realized I was missing. "Jean's thinking of moving here permanently," I told Bill as we drove. "Suggested we find a place together." Bill glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Good idea. That old Victorian on Maple Street just went on the market. 4 bedrooms, wraparound porch. You two could live like royalty." I laughed. "On a teacher's pension? I don't think so." "You'd be surprised what's possible when you pool resources," Bill said thoughtfully. "Margaret and I have been talking about downsizing ourselves. Our place is too big for just the 2 of us now that the kids are gone." The conversation moved on, but the seed had been planted. For the first time in years, I was seriously considering a future different from the lonely one I'd resigned myself to after Martha's death. At the community center, the usual crowd greeted us warmly. What had once been awkward, being the newcomer, the outsider, had transformed into comfortable familiarity. I knew their names now, their stories, their playing styles. They knew mine as well, greeting me with questions about my recovery, about Jean's visit, about the ongoing situation with Michael. The thought of my son still brought a complex mix of emotions: hurt, hope, caution, love. In the weeks since our meeting at the police station, he had kept his word about the restitution payments. Every Friday, without fail, an envelope arrived containing whatever he had managed to earn that week, along with a brief note, sometimes just a few sentences, sometimes a full page, updating me on his progress, his counseling, his job search. I hadn't seen him in person again, hadn't felt ready for that step. But I read his notes carefully, looking for signs of genuine change, of growth, of the son I had once known re-emerging from the man he had become. Last week's note had been particularly significant. He'd found a job. Nothing glamorous, just stocking shelves at a local grocery store. But it was honest work with steady pay, and he'd moved out of his friend's place into a small studio apartment of his own. "It's basic," he'd written, "but it's mine, paid for with money I earned. That matters to me now in a way it never did before." I'd shared the note with Jean, who had nodded approvingly. "Small steps," she'd said, "but in the right direction." My chess match today was against Harold, a retired accountant with a methodical playing style that challenged my more intuitive approach. As we settled in front of the board, he asked casually, "Heard from your son lately?" The question surprised me. I hadn't realized how much I'd shared with these new friends. "Yes," I said after a moment. "He's found a job. A real one." Harold nodded, moving his pawn to open the game. "Good. That's a start." We played in companionable silence for a while, the familiar rhythm of the game soothing my thoughts. Then Harold spoke again, his eyes still on the board. "My daughter didn't speak to me for 7 years, he said, the confession unexpected. Her choice, not mine. I never knew exactly why. Something about me being too controlling, too judgmental. Maybe I was." I looked up, startled by this personal revelation from a man usually so reserved. "We reconciled when her mother died," he continued, capturing one of my pawns. "Too late for many things, but not for everything. We're finding our way back to each other. It's not the same relationship we had before. It's something new, sometimes better." His words resonated deeply. Wasn't that what I was hoping for with Michael? Not a return to the past, but the creation of something new, something honest, something that acknowledged the pain, without being defined by it. "Thank you for sharing that," I said, moving my knight to counter his strategy. "It helps to know others have walked this path." Harold smiled slightly. "We old folks have to share our battle scars. Otherwise, what's the point of all this living?" After chess, Jean suggested we stop by Elena and Roberto's for an impromptu visit. These two families, Bill and Margaret, Elena and Roberto, had formed the core of my new support system, their homes becoming second homes to me, their kindness a balm to my wounded spirit. Elena greeted us with her characteristic warmth, ushering us into her kitchen where the aroma of fresh bread filled the air. "Just in time," she exclaimed. "I was about to call you. Carlos is here, and he's brought news." Carlos, Roberto's brother and the retired cardiac surgeon, sat at the kitchen table, a manila envelope in front of him. He rose to greet us, his handshake firm, his smile genuine. "James," he said, "I've been hoping you would stop by. I have something to discuss with you." We all settled around the table, Elena serving coffee and slices of warm bread spread with honey. Carlos opened the envelope and pulled out several official-looking documents. "I've been speaking with some colleagues at the hospital," he began, "about starting a cardiac support group for patients and families. The medical aspects of heart surgery receive plenty of attention, but the emotional impact on patients and their loved ones is often overlooked." I nodded, thinking of my own journey, the unexpected challenges, the profound loneliness of those early days of recovery. "The hospital board has approved the program," Carlos continued. But we need someone to lead it. Someone who understands firsthand what patients are going through, who can speak from experience rather than theory. He looked at me meaningfully, and I suddenly understood where this was heading. You want me to lead this group? I asked, disbelief clear in my voice. Carlos smiled. Co-lead, with me. I'll handle the medical questions, you'll handle the human ones. Your experience, not just with the surgery itself, but with the family difficulties that followed, makes you uniquely qualified to help others navigate similar challenges. I sat back, overwhelmed by the suggestion. Me leading a support group? The very idea would have seemed absurd just a few months ago. I'd been so wrapped up in my own pain, my own isolation. How could I possibly help others? I don't know, I said hesitantly. I'm not sure I'm qualified. That's exactly why you are qualified, Carlos insisted. You're still in the process. Still finding your way. That authenticity is what people need to see. Not someone who has all the answers, but someone who understands the questions. Jean laid her hand on my arm. He's right, James. Think of how alone you felt after your surgery. Wouldn't it have made a difference to talk to someone who truly understood? The memory of those dark days was still vivid. The pain, the betrayal, the overwhelming sense of abandonment. If I could help even one person feel less alone in that experience, I'll think about it. I promised, echoing my response to Jean's proposal earlier that day. Carlos seemed satisfied. That's all I ask. The program won't start for another month. Take your time. As we drove home, I found myself considering both offers. Jean's suggestion that we find a place together, Carlos's invitation to co-lead the support group. Both represented new beginnings, new purposes, new ways of being in the world. Both required a kind of courage I wasn't sure I possessed. You're overthinking it, Jean said as we entered my apartment, reading my expression with the accuracy of long familiarity. That's always been your way, analyzing every angle until you've talked yourself out of taking action. Someone in this family has to be the cautious one, I retorted, smiling to soften the words. Cautious is one thing, paralyzed is another. Jean's tone was gentle but firm. James, do you know what I've seen since I arrived? A man who survived not just heart surgery, but heartbreak. Who's building a new life from the fragments of the old. Who's surrounded himself with people who genuinely care about him. That takes courage. The very courage you're doubting you have. Her words struck home, forcing me to see myself through her eyes rather than my own critical lens. Had I been courageous? It hadn't felt that way. It had felt like survival, like putting one foot in front of the other because there was no alternative. Maybe, I conceded. But these decisions, they're big steps. Every journey is made of steps, Jean said simply. Some bigger than others, but all taking you somewhere new. That night, unable to sleep, I sat at my kitchen table with my journal open before me. In the months since my surgery, this journal had become my confidant, my witness, my way of processing the seismic shifts in my life. I wrote about John's proposal, about Carlos's offer, about my lingering uncertainties regarding Michael. As I wrote, a pattern emerged that I hadn't fully recognized before. A thread of connection running through each of these seemingly separate issues. They all asked the same fundamental question. Did I trust myself enough, trust life enough to open my heart again? To risk disappointment, failure, hurt? To believe that whatever came, I had the strength to face it? The answer, I realized with surprise, was yes. Yes, I did trust myself that much. Yes, I was willing to risk being hurt again. Yes, I believed in my own resilience. This recognition didn't magically dissolve all my concerns or answer all my questions, but it did provide a foundation, a starting point from which decisions could flow. The next morning, I called Carlos and accepted his offer to co-lead the support group. Then I asked Jean to help me start looking at larger apartments or small houses that might accommodate both of us comfortably. What changed your mind? She asked, clearly pleased but curious. I realized I've been living as if my heart surgery was the end of my story, I said slowly, finding the words as I spoke. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter. And I get to decide what that chapter contains. Jean's smile was worth any uncertainty I still felt. Well said, little brother, well said. The following week brought another envelope from Michael. The usual restitution payment, but with a longer letter than usual. He'd been promoted at the grocery store, given more responsibility. His counselor thought he was making good progress, and had suggested he might be ready for family counseling, if I was willing. The suggestion gave me pause. Family counseling meant seeing Michael in person, engaging directly with the pain and betrayal, working actively toward healing our relationship rather than simply allowing time to pass. Was I ready for that level of engagement? I shared the letter with Dr. Liu during our weekly session, still finding it slightly strange but also comforting to have a professional sounding board for my thoughts and feelings. "What's holding you back?" she asked after I'd expressed my reservations. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Fear, maybe. Fear that it won't work, that he hasn't really changed, that I'll be hurt again." "That's valid," she acknowledged. "But consider this. What's the alternative? Keeping him at arm's length indefinitely? Never knowing if reconciliation might have been possible? Would that bring you peace?" I considered her question seriously. "No," I said finally. "It wouldn't. The uncertainty would always be there." "Then perhaps the risk is worth taking," she suggested. "Not with blind trust. You can maintain appropriate boundaries, proceed cautiously, but at least with willingness to try." That evening, I composed a reply to Michael, agreeing to family counseling with certain conditions. That we start with just one session, that we use a counselor of my choosing, that we proceed at a pace I was comfortable with. I sealed the letter, deciding to mail it myself rather than give it to Jean to post as I usually did. The walk to the mailbox was short, but it felt significant, a small action that represented a larger commitment. As I dropped the letter into the slot, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Whatever came next, I had chosen engagement over avoidance, possibility over fear. 2 days later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a woman's voice I hadn't heard in months spoke hesitantly. "Mr. Reynolds?" "It's Vanessa." My daughter-in-law, the last person I expected to hear from. I gripped the phone tighter, unsure how to respond. I owe you an apology," she continued when I remained silent. "What I did was unforgivable. I'm not asking for forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry." The words sounded genuine, lacking the defensive tone that had characterized most of our interactions over the years. "Thank you for calling, Vanessa," I said finally. "I appreciate the apology." "Michael doesn't know I'm calling," she added quickly. We're not together anymore, as you probably know. But I've been in therapy too, trying to understand why I did what I did, why I became the person I became. It's not easy, facing yourself honestly." "No," I agreed, "it isn't. Anyway, I just wanted to say that. And to tell you that I'm making arrangements to pay back my share of what we took. It might take a while. I'm waiting tables in Oregon, not making much. But I'll do it." After we hung up, I sat for a long time, processing the unexpected conversation. Vanessa's call represented yet another piece falling into place in this mosaic of healing and reconciliation. Not a neat, tidy resolution. Life rarely offered those, but another step toward wholeness, toward integration of the past with the present. The next few weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Jean and I found a charming 2-bedroom cottage with a small garden, close enough to both Bill and Margaret's place, and Elena and Roberto's to maintain those precious connections. Carlos and I met several times to plan the cardiac support group, developing a structure that balanced information with emotional support, practical advice with space for sharing personal experiences. And I had my first family counseling session with Michael. It was awkward, painful at times, but also cathartic. The counselor, a woman named Dr. Chen who specialized in family estrangement and reconciliation, guided us skillfully through the initial conversation. We didn't resolve everything. That would take many more sessions, many more difficult conversations. But we made a start, establishing a foundation of honesty upon which we might, with time and effort, rebuild some form of relationship. As winter gave way to the first tentative signs of spring, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months. From the cold hospital room where I'd lain alone, certain that my life was ending in more ways than one, to this moment of new beginnings, new connections, new purpose. My heart, once broken physically and emotionally, had healed in ways I never could have imagined. The scar on my chest would always remain, a reminder of vulnerability and mortality, but it had become a badge of honor as well, a mark of survival, of resilience, of the body's remarkable capacity to repair itself when given the proper care and time. The emotional scars, too, were healing, not disappearing, but becoming integrated into the fabric of who I was becoming. The betrayal had changed me, as all significant pain does, but I was determined that it would change me for the better, making me more compassionate, more authentic, more appreciative of the genuine connections I now cherished. On moving day, friends gathered to help Jean and I settle into our new home. Bill and Margaret brought plants for the garden. Elena and Roberto supplied a feast for the workers. Carlos hung pictures with surgical precision. Diane and her parents set up the kitchen with loving attention to detail. And to my surprise, Michael came too, arriving quietly with a housewarming gift, a small wooden box he had made himself in a woodworking class he was taking at the community college. "It's not much," he said, handing it to me with evident nervousness. "But I made it myself. Honest work." The box was simple but beautiful, the wood polished to a soft glow, the joinery precise and tight. Inside was a small card that read simply, "For a new beginning. With love, Michael." I looked at my son, still my son, despite everything, and saw both the man he had become and the man he was trying to be. The road ahead would not be easy for either of us. There would be setbacks, misunderstandings, moments when the past threatened to overwhelm the present. But there would also be opportunities for grace, for growth, for the slow rebuilding of trust. "Thank you," I said, accepting both the gift and what it represented. "It's perfect." That night, after everyone had gone and Jean had retired to her room, I sat on the porch of our new home, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The evening air held the promise of spring, of renewal, of life continuing its eternal cycle of death and rebirth. My hand rested lightly over my heart, feeling its steady, faithful rhythm. 6 months ago, this heart had been failing, damaged by years of stress and poor habits, in need of surgical intervention to continue its vital work. Now it beat strong and sure, nourishing a body that was growing healthier by the day, a mind that was clearer than it had been in years, a spirit that had found new purpose and meaning. The heart, I had learned, was more than a muscle, more than a pump. It was a metaphor for the very core of our being, our capacity to love, to hurt, to heal, to begin again. My heart had been broken and mended, both literally and figuratively. And in that mending, I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed, connections I never expected to form, possibilities I never dared to imagine. The journey wasn't over. In many ways it was just beginning, but as I sat there in the gathering darkness, I felt a profound sense of peace, of rightness, of gratitude for this second chance at living fully, authentically, wholeheartedly. Tomorrow, the cardiac support group would hold its first meeting. Tomorrow, Michael would come for dinner, a small step toward a new kind of relationship. Tomorrow, Jean and I would plant the first seeds in our garden, an act of faith in the future. But tonight, in this quiet moment, it was enough to simply be, to breathe, to feel, to acknowledge how far I had come, and to embrace the road that still lay ahead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.